In this chapter, we're going to take a look at the concept of color in general. What is color correction? What is color grading? This, I think, is going to give us a really good foundation for understanding basically everything else we cover in the class. So let's first talk about this term color grading. A lot of people will use color correction and color grading interchangeably, and really, if you ask 10 different colorists what their definition of each one is, you'll probably get 10 different answers. Generally, the way that I think of it is there's color correction, which is kind of making the image look normal, right? It is if there's a problem with the camera, if the image was underexposed, or if the white balance wasn't set right and there's some kind of color cast, it is fixing that so that it looks technically right. And then I think of color grading in itself as more of creating emotional tones that enhance a story. So if you want something to feel cold, you make it blue. If you want it to feel warm, you make it more kind of yellow tone. And that's kind of how I've thought about it for a long time. But in a broader sense, when you talk about color grading is kind of the whole process of all of this. It is anything from fixing technical problems, making things look normal, to enhancing the story with the colors, as well as even doing more detailed things like leading the viewer's eye when they're looking at an image, helping shape and kind of relight things, as well as just getting more detailed on kind of massaging how a shot feels. Like I said, all of these kind of go together in kind of the bigger term color grading. So let's dive into kind of what we mean by these things. First of all, we have corrections. So this is really all about making an image look normal. In this example, we have this really blue tone across the whole image. Now, this I would probably argue is done on purpose for stylistic reasons, but it's very similar to how something might look if you didn't shoot it with the right white balance. A white balance is basically what color the camera thinks is white. So if we have something like a white ball and we take a picture of it and our white balance is correct, it's going to look white. If we don't have our white balance correct, this ball that's actually white in the real world might look more kind of orangish yellow. It could also be tinted green or really any other color, depending on the type of light that's actually hitting the ball and the type of light that the camera is expecting. The good news is this is a relatively easy thing to fix in color. We can take this image of a green ball and make some adjustments so that it looks white on our monitor. And without these kind of tools, if we were to shoot something without the correct white balance, we would be stuck with whatever tone the camera kind of picked up. The next aspect of color grading is feeling. This kind of goes beyond what is technically accurate, right? And it kind of throws that reality out the window a little bit for the sake of emotions and story. So this shot right here, you might argue is not balanced correctly. Her skin kind of looks greenish. This back wall is really green, which you don't know in real life if it's green or not, but we kind of have these kind of olive tones over everything, which is pretty likely not how it actually was in the real world. This is some adjustment that the photographer has put on this image to give it a certain feeling. And depending on the colors and especially the context in the story, you can make the viewer feel certain emotions. So this one kind of feels a little bit more uncomfortable, a little bit more dramatic. Whereas if her skin tone was totally normal and there wasn't kind of this green tinge to everything, we might not feel that kind of dramatic importance, that kind of uneasiness that kind of green tone gives us. So this is a stylistic choice that we can push into our images when we're doing color grading. The next aspect of color grading, I like to call shaping. This is all about taking specific parts of the image and enhancing them, making them more or less noticeable, kind of changing the more detailed parts of the image. And the point of this is just to make everything overall a little better, and really to get the viewer to look at what you want them to look at. For instance, you might take a photo like this and select just this doorway and kind of keep the brightness there and darken everything else, or kind of darken or maybe blur this foreground by kind of selecting it with a shape and adjusting just this part of the image. And there are a ton of tools that we're going to dive into when it comes to doing this. And this is where things really get fun and you can get really creative if you know what you're doing and you kind of know the foundational concepts of what we're really trying to accomplish with color grading. So that's really the overview of color grading as a whole. Next, we'll dive into kind of an overview of the workflow of how color is done.